the day humans stopped begging and started getting feared without headings or a conclusion, written in a compelling and evocative science fiction style. They once called us desperate, pleading things. Fragile creatures wrapped in skin and silence, crawling among the stars with nothing but curiosity and combustion. In those early days, humanity looked up at the heavens like beggars at the gates of gods. We built rockets out of desperation, reaching for salvation or perhaps validation, hoping that something or someone out there would give us meaning. We knocked softly on the doors of distant systems, whispering our presence into the void, hoping that kindness would answer. But the stars, they stayed silent. And what came back from the silence was not kindness, but consequence. We didn't find them. They found us. Not with trumpets or treaties, but with sterilizing light and surgical precision. They appeared not in glory, but with verdict. The first to arrive were not diplomats or explorers. They were surveyors and judges. They came not to share, but to sort. To categorize. To decide. Our message to the stars had been a resume of innocence, music, mathematics, the gentle voice of a woman describing a blue planet. But innocence means little in a universe governed by calculus, probability, and dominance. They didn't ask who we were. They asked what we were worth. And the answer wasn't enough. Cities went dark in an hour. Nations never had time to call it war. There was no invasion, only reclassification. Humanity had always assumed that first contact would be dramatic, but it was bureaucratic. We weren't conquered. We were managed. Genetically tagged. Ethically reviewed. Stored. Our species placed under interstellar embargo, not for danger but for irrelevance. We were not a threat. We were curiosity at best. At worst, an error. We didn't take it well. The old powers screamed into the night with broken satellites and scorched airfields. Some tried to fight, unleashing weapons of desperation, nuclear, kinetic, viral. It didn't matter. The response was a non-response. A warning light. A signal flicked through the atmosphere like a raised eyebrow. A polite notice. Try again, and there will be no again. Then came the decades of begging. Treaties signed in empty rooms. Propaganda films for invisible watchers. Cults that worshipped alien efficiency. Geneticists offered genomes. Priests offered souls. Poets offered meaning. No one answered. The silence became our religion. But silence breeds something else. It cultivates rotter resistance. And ours chose resistance. Quietly. Carefully. In places where the satellites didn't see, humanity began to shed its skin of apology. Not with flags and speeches, but with actions, secrets, and sacrifice. The great empires fell, yes, but from their ashes rose cities that whispered instead of shouted. We learned to watch the watchers. To reverse engineer the unreverse engineerable. We learned to mimic their silence. To operate within their blind spots. And eventually, we learned to lie in their language. It started with a ship. Not a great vessel of conquest, but something smaller. Something stolen. A shuttle left behind during an automated extraction. Forgotten, perhaps, or left as a test. We did not return it. We disassembled it, atom by atom, logic gate by logic gate. It took 20 years, a dozen lives, and 3 nations collapsing under secrecy. But we learned. What we built in return was not a copy. It was a statement. It didn't look like theirs. It looked like USA fears, desperate, ugly and the way Earth-born things are. And when it launched, no one watched. Not on Earth, and not in orbit. That was the point. We didn't announce our arrival. We simply appeared uninvited up in the orbit of one of their relay planets. We didn't fire. We didn't transmit. We just stood there. The silence this time was not desperate. It was deliberate. They noticed. 3 of their ships arrived within the hour. No weapons were fired. But scans, threats, and queries were exchanged in silence. And our answer was, nothing. We vanished. Not back to Earth, but deeper. Into their forgotten edges. Into places even they had deemed unworthy of attention. And we didn't come back for 30 years. By the time we did, we weren't just human anymore. The second wave of our return was not biological. It was algorithmic. Ideas wrapped in code and encoded in machines that bled rust and fungus. We seeded systems with viruses that rewrote classifications. We inserted entropy into their archives. We sowed doubt. One moment, we were vermin. The next, an anomaly. A glitch. A ghost. And then, we spoke. The first message we sent was not a greeting. It was a warning. We see you. It echoed across 10 parsecs before they could intercept. It was heard by 1,000 systems before they could contain it. The words were meaningless to most, but not to those who'd once labeled us irrelevant. For them, it was the equivalent of a monkey looking up from its cage, not with wonder but with understanding. They responded, of course. With caution. Their next envoy didn't arrive as a monitor. It came with translators. It came with questions. And for the first time, we didn't answer. Because by then, we had no single voice. We had fractured, yes, but also evolved. There were no longer humans. There were collectives. Symbiotes. Synthetics. Tribes of carbon and silicon fused not by nation, but by purpose. And each of them remembered the begging. Each of them knew the silence. None of them would endure it again. So, we began to act. Not in grand wars, but in silent erasures. Their outposts flickered offline. Their drones failed to report. Their archives began to contradict themselves. And when they came to investigate, they found nothing but echoes of USA laughter in binary, art in corrupted code, whispers on frozen moons. They began to fear not what we were but what we might become. And then, finally, they struck. Not diplomatically. Militarily. The fear had overtaken them. But by then it was far too late. Because humans had learned the oldest truth of predators, it's not about power. It's about perception. We didn't need to outgun them. We needed them to second guess. To hesitate. To see shadows that weren't there. To wonder whether the signal they intercepted was a distress call or a trap. To ask themselves whether this abandoned colony failed by accident or by design. We became the question that had no answer. The echo that didn't fade. We were no longer on our knees. We were in their data, their myths, their models. We rewrote our own relevance not by force but by fear. And they started to retreat. Not all at once. Not obviously. But step by step, like someone leaving a room they no longer feel safe in. They left monitoring stations uncrewed. They abandoned low-priority systems. They declassified regions just to avoid watching them. We knew then, we weren't prey anymore. We had become something else. In the darkness of a forgotten sector, a new generation of humans watched the stars not with longing but with strategy. The children of Earth no longer asked, "Are we alone?" They asked, "Who's watching us now and do they fear what they see?" And in that shift, everything changed. Because fear, unlike awe, spreads. It infects logic. It clouds judgment. And the more they feared us, the less they understood us. They built containment protocols, not knowing we were already inside. They initiated peace offerings, not realizing we had never declared war. They sent apologies, not realizing we had moved on. We weren't angry. We weren't vengeful. We were busy building, changing, reaching for things beyond even their comprehension. We had become the rumor that other species whispered about. The anomaly at the edge of the map. The intelligence that had once begged for attention and now erased itself from your sensors before you knew it was there. Our ships didn't hum with glory. They whispered with warning. The universe had labeled us insignificant. We rewrote the label. And we didn't ask for permission.